what I'm going to talk about is, or give you a version of the history of the Etowah site. And it's something that I've been working on for a very long time, and my understanding of it has changed over the years. But I'm going to do it by engaging in imagery that the inhabitants of Etowah made over the course of that history. And I'm going to kind of focus in on a couple of images for the different periods in the history to tell the history in a different way. I decided to tell this story through imagery because right now here at Emory, there is an exhibition called This Land Calls Us Home, which is art made by Indigenous people. And Denise and Miranda invited us to the opening a little while ago. And when I walked around and saw what the artists had made, I was not so much amazed, but interested to see that they're engaging in ancient imagery that we also see at Etowah. And it made me really understand and think about when you read the artist's statements, they're using ancient imagery and they're putting it in their modern context, and they're talking about their identity, they're connecting to their history, and they're also connecting to place, a place they've largely been removed from, but it's still place. And that's something that people use imagery for all the time, and people deep into the past did the same. So I'm going to use some of the imagery from Etowah that I'm going to suggest some ideas on what it says about identity, history, and place at different times throughout the history of Etowah. A few things I want to say before I start. One is it's important to remember that where Etowah is located, and even where we are now and throughout the Southeast, this is and was and continues to be an indigenous landscape. It's an indigenous place for at least 15 or 20,000 years. And it continues to be really important to indigenous people that are still around. It's sacred. It's their homeland. Their ancestors are buried here. The Muskogee, ancestors of the Muskogee people probably built Etowah, but later Etowah became part of the Cherokee Nation, and the Cherokee Nation, as most of you know, was removed from Georgia through the Treaty of New Echota in 1835. And if you know the story, you know the Cherokee Nation was not in agreement with this treaty. And so this is land that was ceded under duress. And it's important to remember that because indigenous people remember that, and it's not a bad idea for us to remember. The other thing is I'm not a Native American. I don't have indigenous ancestry. I'm telling a story from a Western perspective. I'm an archaeologist. I'm a sometimes scientist. And I work with iconography, which is art history. These are Western ways of knowing and understanding and explaining. And I've put together a story based on that, but indigenous people often have their own way of understanding, explaining, and telling a story that's going to be different from mine. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. That is a good story. It's their story. It's important to us to hear that, to understand it. That's not the story I'm telling, but I'm hoping in the near future that I can incorporate that or be able to tell that story or have them tell that story alongside mine. So I just want you to know where we are and where I fit into this. All right. So let's just position ourselves in time and space. In terms of archaeology, we call what Etowah is Mississippian. It's a time period, roughly from 900 to 1600 CE. Etowah was really only occupied probably from 1100 or 1050 to 1550, probably only 500 or 600 years of this. And it's a geographic region. You can get 4 Mississippian archaeologists together, and we would argue over whether this map is correct, but you get the idea, roughly what it is. And it's really very diverse people speaking different languages, having different approaches to certain aspects of life, but they all conducted corn agriculture, built earthen platform mounds, and at some level had inequality built into their social standing. And that's why we as archaeologists lump them together, even if there's a tremendous amount of diversity. Etowah is one of these big places, and I'm going to call it an indigenous city. You may not be used to hearing us talk about indigenous places in the Southeast as cities, but it was. It was a big place at one point. In fact, you'll hear me say it a couple of times. It was the Atlanta of the 14th century. All right, so I'm going to talk about imagery. And I want you to understand where I'm getting this from and give you a little bit of a primer to where I'm going to pull some of this stuff from. And I am part of a working group that has focused on understanding Mississippian imagery. Not so much meaning, because meaning is tricky, but what these images refer to. And we've had archaeologists, historians, art historians, folklorists, indigenous people working together to reconstruct what we think we understand about the imagery and about the Mississippian cosmos. And this drawing here is a representation of that was created from 25 years of work. And it gives a model of the cosmos and also positions a whole bunch of Mississippian imagery within it. And this is really America's wide, this idea of a multi-layered cosmos. The number of layers you can debate, or the number of layers within layers, but you've got this world. The earthly plane is an island floating on the primordial sea. It's got the four cardinal directions, it's got people, it's got animals, and it's got all sorts of sacred beings and spirits and things like that. And at its center is a central axis that runs through the entire cosmos. Up above is a sky realm or a sky dome. Birds and the sun and spirits and things like that are up there. That is a place of sort of order and harmony. Down below is the beneath and underwater world, and that's a place of chaos and death. It's not necessarily always a bad place, but that's where chaos and death come from, but it's also where water comes from, the regeneration of the natural world comes from, and where souls return to living bodies. And the whole thing is connected through this axis, which you can see little bits of it. Sometimes it's a tree, but you see the striped pole, and spirits, souls, medicine, prayers travel between the realms up and down this. And one of the things we've identified, and this is one of the things you'll hear me talk about a little bit, is we've identified what we would call locatifs, things that identify where we are in the cosmos. And that circle with cross in the middle, that's the sacred center in the earthly plane. Up above, it's that circle with cross with what we call a pedaloid surround, almost like a sunburst surround, the center above. And the center below is a spinning cross because it's the whirlpool that's sucking you down into the beneath world. All right. See if I can press the right button this time. I did it. One of the things that I want you to understand about Mississippian imagery, and I'll just say this right here, you're not going to see any pictures of these things that I'm going to be talking about. It's all drawings because these are sacred. These are private. Indigenous nations, and it varies from person to person and nation to nation, seem to be okay with line drawings and drawings, but not the actual images. Those images are living beings. They're animated with souls, and you're really not supposed to flash them around. That's not what they're about. So you're going to see just pictures. But I want you to understand what we think we've learned. You can see things that look like, well, there's some sort of a cat, and there's some sort of a snake, and there's a bird, and you'll see some people and things like that. These aren't images of real people and animals in the real world. These are supernatural beings other than humans, spirit beings that are patterned on things in the real world, and you can see elements of them in the real world. But these aren't real world images per se. These are referencing spirits and powers and beings. And creating these things is a sacred act. It's something that you connect to the sacred to do. And in creating it, these things are animated. They're alive. They have a soul. They have agency. And when somebody puts them on, you see this is National Geographic. Thank goodness for National Geographic. This person is being decked out and he's got all this stuff on. The stuff he's wearing is really regalia that's connecting him to spiritual essences that allow him to do certain ceremonies. And the things he's wearing and stuff are the equipment for that too. So we're not looking at Rolex watches here. We're looking at the gear that people use to connect to the spiritual world to conduct ceremony. And so when we talk about this imagery, that's what we're talking about. And you can see it on copper, shell, stone, pottery, a bunch of different media. These two over here would be shell. That one over there is stone, and that one up there is shell. All right, so I'm gonna talk a lot about the earthly plane. Let's see if I can do it. Yes. So that's this right here. That's where we are, right? We're on the island floating on the primordial sea, connected to above and below by this axis. And if you look at it from above, you can say it looks like that. Here's the primordial sea. Here's the edge of and it really is. If you go to the edge of this world, you fall off. So there's an edge. The realm of people, and then there's space, and then there's the sacred center. And that's a map or a vision of this world of the cosmos. This is where people are. One of the interesting things that we've known for a very long time about Southeastern indigenous ritual practice is that you can remake the world. In fact, they do it every year at what's called the green corn ceremony, probably the most important ceremony that a lot of indigenous people who practice traditional religions do. It happens at midsummer. It is done in a ceremonial ground like this, where you've got the sacred fire in the middle, you've got an open space, and then you've got these 4 pavilions where members of the community sit, and then there's usually some sort of an edge. And the sacred fire, you can see over there, the pillar of smoke that goes up from the sacred fire is part of that axis that connects to the above, and there's one that goes down below. When the green corn ceremony is conducted, it takes several days, and people get rid of their old stuff. The old fire is extinguished and a new one is born. And when it's born, the entire world is reborn. Society is reborn. The natural world is reborn. So they're sort of cleansing the world every year. And that's something cyclical that's done within the context of this ceremonial ground. And in case you didn't guess it already, if you look at how the ceremonial ground is laid out, it's another version of the map of this world of the cosmos. You've got the sacred center, the realm, the open space, the realm of people, and the edge. And so when this space is activated ritually, what you do in there on this map of this world affects the real world. So they're actually doing things in this space that's patterned on the earthly plane that affects the entire world. But that's not all. When we look at Mississippian platform mounds, we know they're built in stages. Sometimes they can be over generations or even centuries. A stage is built, a building or some use is on top, and then after a while that's taken apart and a new stage is built. What we understand linguistically is these platform mounds are connected to the earth. These are earth symbols. And so putting another stage over a mound is renewing the world. So that's another way that you renew the world, is by manipulating yet another model of the earthly plane. And there's my picture of that with the earthly plane on top of the mound, in case I didn't say that enough. Here's another interesting thing, especially in Muskegean languages, another term for the ceremonial ground is the big house. This is the house of the community. So if this is the house of the community, then each individual family in the community has a house, and you know where I'm going already. Here is a post hole pattern of a Mississippian house. There's a cutaway of it, but this can be understood as another map of the earthly plane. You've got the sacred fire in the center. You've got the open space. You've got sleeping beds around the edges, which is the realm of people. You hit the wall and you're at the edge. So what does that mean? What could that mean? That when you make a house, when you live in a house, that's the place of your family on the earthly plane. And when you make it, you're making the place of your family on the earthly plane. But wait, there's more. Most Mississippian communities are laid out like this, and you see it already. I don't have to go through it, but you've got the palisade wall, which is the edge. You've got the realm of people around it. You've got an open space, and you've got a sacred center in the middle. It's another map of the earthly plane, of this world. So when you situate your community in here, what are you doing? You're situating them in the earthly plane. When you make a new community and put it there, you are placing your community in the cosmos. And there's one more. you can also make the case that a pottery vessel can be understood as a map of the cosmos also. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why, but here's just a model of it. The top of the rim of it is the earthly plane, and you go down into it. Remember, the beneath world is under the ground. What's a pot made out of? It's made out of clay. It's made out of the ground. And so we can think about this as another model of this. In this case, it's the cosmos, right? But let's do a little bit more. Making a pot is, in a sense, recreating the world. Because a lot of indigenous nations here in the Southeast understand that the world was created when a being dove down into the bottom of the ocean, pulled up dirt, mud, and made earth, right? And you've heard this sometimes called Turtle Island. Usually that being is female. So if we go back here, what does a woman do to make a pot? They go to water, the edge of the water, they dig into it, get clay, and they form it into a pot. They're doing the exact same thing as original creation, going down into the beneath world, getting soil, and creating a pot as this world. So you could also, if you want to go with me on this, say that if you make a pottery vessel, you can also think of it as an act of creation or recreating the world. All right, that's my setup. So here we have Etowah. Over on your left, we have an aerial view, and here on the right, you can see the major features of the site. How many of you have been here to Etowah? Perfect. That's what I want to. So you can close your eyes and picture this. But so you've got 6 mounds. Mound A, the biggest one, somewhere 65 to 70 feet tall, one of the biggest in the Southeast, but not the biggest. And then 5 other smaller mounds. Then you had a ditch that surrounded the whole thing with burrow pits that were used for sources of fill for the mounds, a big plaza in the middle. Not all of that was built at once. This is the story I'm going to tell you, is how all of this came to be. But you can already see some things, right? There are mounds. Mounds are models of the earthly plane. There's a community that's a model of the earthly plane. All right. So let's start at the beginning. Before Etowah was occupied, there was not a community there. Again, indigenous people have been using this landscape for at least 15,000 years before Etowah showed up, but there wasn't a town. So people came together to create this town. The exact dating is a little fuzzy, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 works. But people came to it and they created this place. It was brand new. And they were doing brand new things at this place that I'll talk a little bit more about. But the interesting thing, there's a grad student out in California that I've been working with, and he's been looking at pottery decoration and pottery recipes, and he's able to argue that there are local people from northern Georgia and there are people from eastern Tennessee that came together to create earliest Etowah. And so it's different groups of people coming together and making a place. And this is just a map. We've got an early mound stage, but there's nothing else like it in the Etowah River Valley at this time. So here's my first image, or images. And they're not nearly as exciting as some of the other ones I've shown, but these are complicated stamped motifs. People made pots. They would take a wooden paddle, carve a design into it. Women would build a coil pot, and then they would use the paddle to meld the coils together. And then when it's fired, it's frozen in place. And these have really fascinating names: line block, ladder base diamond, and 2-bar diamond. I didn't make them up, but we're stuck with them. But these are images. These are the earliest images that we can see at Etowah. And the interesting thing is, those are new. People weren't making those images before, so they came along with Etowah. And they're impressed on pottery that follows 3 different recipes: the local North Georgia, which is sand tempered; Eastern Tennessee, which was largely limestone tempered; and then shell tempering, which was completely new. So you got new people doing their own thing, and then you got a new thing, and they're decorating it in a new way, in a new place, Etowah, and they're creating this new place. And you're going to see this, you're going to guess this by now, but if you look at the 2-bar diamond, you can do it with a ladder base also, you can convince yourself, as I have, that you're looking at the cosmos from the side, right? You've got the earthly plane in the middle, above and below. So what they're impressing on the pots women are impressing on the pots is a model of the cosmos. And then what's that? The earthly plane, right? With the sacred center and the four cardinal directions. That's what they're impressing into the pottery in this new place with old and new recipes. And so you can think about the fact that what's going on here, or one way to understand this, is women are making the pottery in this new place with new designs. And what are they doing? They're creating the world at this new place now. So it's part of creating this community, and it starts with women and what women are doing. All right. I already said that a Mississippian house can be thought of in the same way. This one is a little bit different. The local North Georgia style before Etowah was single set posts and then a gabled roof. This one, they dig a trench and they prefab walls made out of saplings, put them in the trenches and tie it together at the top. It's a new form of architecture at this new place that people are building at this new place as they establish Etowah. And you can make the case that this is also families building their place in this new community, building their world right there at Etowah. And they're doing it with something new. One of the things that we did early on at Etowah, working with the Muskogee Nation, was to do gradiometry, because we didn't want to do as much digging. This uses magnetism to look below the ground, and you can see subtle differences in the magnetic signatures. I don't do this. I just tell stories based on it. We have somebody who's incredible at it. But this is the entire Etowah site that we've done, and you can't make out much, but you can see dark stuff and light stuff. And that dark outlines are high magnetism. And I wish I knew what this was, but I don't, and I would love to figure it out. But if you look over here, you can see a whole bunch of squares with dots. Those are houses with a hearth in the center. And when we look at them, some of them are better preserved than others, but there's a bunch of these little neighborhoods. So earliest Etowah is made up of a bunch of little neighborhoods. And each of those neighborhoods is roughly laid out like that. So here's our gradiometer map, and you can see the buildings. Here's sort of a reconstruction. And what are we seeing? We're seeing that these neighborhoods, people are creating the place of their social group in this world at Etowah. So they're repeating the same thing: pottery, house, and now sub-community or neighborhood. And we have the earliest stages of Mound A. Now, Mound A is too big to dig. But over on the side, the opposite side from where we are, back in the 50s, they excavated some really big pits that turn out to be the borrow pits that are the first stages of Mound A. And they date to this earliest time period. And just as an aside, we recently found, Terry Powis in the back working with me, we found genetic evidence that there's actually chocolate in pots from these borrow pits from around 1100 CE. But that's another whole story. The point is here, they're starting the earliest stages of Mound A, and what did we say about building mounds? Building a mound is recreating the earth, right? Manipulating the earth, because it's an earth symbol too. So here at earliest Etowah, they're building this first mound, and the entire community is coming together to rebuild the earth at this place. And so you see where that image ties to one of the themes here. There, when Etowah is established, they're making their place in the cosmos. And they do it with pottery, they do it with the houses, they do it with the layout of the neighborhoods, and they do it with the mounds. And they're doing it with people coming together from different places, and they're doing things that are completely new. They understand what they mean, but the form of them are completely new. If we jump ahead a little bit in time, we just did 1050 to 1150, now we're doing 1150 to 1250, they continue to do similar sorts of things. You can see the complicated stamped pottery over here on the left, and you clearly recognize at this point that those are all models of the earthly plane. They're building another mound, a second mound, and they're making houses, but the pottery and the houses have returned to the local North Georgia style. All the pottery is sand tempered. The other recipes are now gone. And instead of making wall trench houses, they're making single set post houses. So it's really interesting. People come together. They bring some of their own things, and there's all these new practices. They create this place, and then it becomes sort of unified as one set of recipes and one set of practices, but they're still doing the same thing. They're remaking their place in the cosmos with pottery, with houses, and with mounds. Then something really interesting happens. Around 1250 CE, this image shows up. And you may recall that image is in one of the art pieces that's in the exhibit that's here in the library. This is a copper plate that's about this big. It's cold hammered copper. It's embossed and cut out, and it's part of regalia. And I can't remember what I say next. Okay. When this figure shows up, things take off at Etowah. Mounds B and A, which were already begun, triple in size. So there's a lot of dirt moving. Mound C is begun, and I'll talk a little bit more about Mound C. When you look in the river valley, all of a sudden there are other towns with mounds all around. So all of a sudden things get really busy at Etowah, and we're working our way to the Atlanta of the 14th century. They're still doing this stuff, complicated stamp pottery, variations on a theme, right? Single set post houses. So these things are still there, but what gets layered on top is what we find in the new mound. This is Mound C, completely excavated, reconstructed. Over 350 ancestral remains were excavated from there. Today, we would never dig that up. That was the 20s to 1961. We have a very different understanding of what's right and what's wrong, and the rights of indigenous people and what happens to their sacred ancestors that wasn't respected or understood at the time. This is a map, and I don't do much with this, but I'm going to show you. This is a map of all the graves that were excavated in the mound over multiple stages. And this is where that copper plate, we call him the Birdman, that copper plate and lots of other things were found. And that's one of the things that's new. Now we have this new image and we have a new mound, and they're doing something completely different. All right, so it's not just that whole figure that we call the Birdman, but his regalia too. So he's got this headdress that's that thing right there. And there are a bunch of people buried in Mound C with those. And he's holding a head. There's the head right there. That's another plate. So there's a bunch of stuff. And the interesting thing is, in terms of artistic style, art styles have specific sets of rules that come from specific places and specific cultural contexts. And we can say that this imagery was made at the Cahokia site or in the environs of the Cahokia site because of style. And probably maybe at least 50 years or more before it made its way to Etowah. But it did make its way to Etowah. And it wasn't just those things, because remember, that's regalia. That's stuff that's alive and connects people to ritual practice and spiritual beings. So this came with people. And it came a long way. Now, that figure, this is one of the things that the working group that I've worked with has posited about this figure, because it's coming from the upper Midwest. And folks like the Ho-Chunk and the Osage and the Ponca tell this epic story, this epic narrative of the sun in the sky and his male relatives. And if anybody knows the Popol Vuh, this is a lot like the Popol Vuh, but we won't get into how that happened. But the sun in the sky goes down to the beneath world to do battle with beings of the beneath world, and he loses, and they cut off his head. So the sun is removed from the sky, balance, there's no more balance in the cosmos. So two of his male relatives go down there. They defeat the beings of the beneath world. They get dad's head. They bring it back to their mother's house, who has always had this ability. She brings him back to life. He bursts out of her house, pushes sea and sky apart, and creates space for the creation of this world. He's a culture hero. He's a creator being. He's the central axis of the cosmos. Can you see why people might want regalia that attaches them to this figure? So that's what we think this figure is all about. And it's not that people here in Georgia didn't think about a similar creator being, but the image is new. Some other things come with this, and it's coming from the Mississippi Valley, and it's coming from eastern Tennessee. Because again, we have people coming from other places to Etowah that's part of its transformation. And you might see some familiar things. You see the center in this world, you see the center above, you see the center in the beneath world, you see another creator being over the center of the cosmos. And here you go. Here's the cosmos from the side. Here's this world. Birds are standing on it. Here's the beneath world, and here's the above world. So we're seeing the same imagery coming from other places. These are things other people understand, and they're being represented in different ways, but they're coming to Etowah as part of ritual equipment. Now, something really interesting happens when the Mississippi Valley version of the Birdman shows up. The people at Etowah start making their own, and they put it on shell gorgets. And you can see the similarities, right? Got a tail, wings, got this beak sort of a thing. But instead of a mace, they have a stone blade. And instead of a head, which remember this is Dad's head, right? That's what we think. They've got this thing. And I'll show you what this thing is in a minute. But this stone blade is a piece of ritual equipment that other people in Mount C are buried with. So they're making their own version of it. And remember I said that this is really one of the sons bringing Dad's head back from the beneath. So he's rescuing day from night, life from death. And I'm going to tell you that that's the same thing, and I'm going to tell you why. That thing, you see it? Is what he's got. He's got it by the nose. This is some sort of a moth with a curly proboscis, dots on the wing, a little forked tail, and he's got, here's the nose, there's the eye, the antennae, here's the wings, and then the body's under his leg. Who's in the winning position here? The Birdman. People have argued that this is patterned on a hawk moth. A hawk moth is a big moth that comes out at dusk and flies up into the night sky. One of the things we understand about the indigenous cosmos is above world, below world. When the sun sets, they switch. So the night sky is the beneath world. So this is a being of the night sky or the beneath world, and the Birdman is kicking his butt. And so this is another version of above defeating below, day defeating night, life being rescued from death. And so the people at Etowah are doing their own version of it in their own style. And the interesting thing is, in Mount C, people are being buried, some with the foreign version of the Birdman and some with the local version, but nobody is buried with both. So it's like there's two different sets of people that are connected to this powerful being. And whether those are lineages or some sort of ritual group, I can't say, but they're different. But they're being buried in the mound. And what does that say? That they're recreating the world with people attached to this Birdman figure, local and non-local, right? So they're setting this into place in the cosmos here at Etowah. And they're connecting probably the most important people to this Birdman figure. All right, so let's jump ahead 75 years. And this is when Etowah is at its peak, somewhere 1325, 1375. Some things happen. There's a ditch and a palisade wall that encloses the entire site. The final stages are added to these mounds. This big plaza, paved plaza, is put out in front of Mound A, and people are moved out of the center of Etowah out into the surrounding area. So this becomes a sacred precinct, in a sense. And if you look throughout the Etowah River Valley, there's even more little mound towns around. So things just get bigger and more complicated. And things continue to happen in Mound C. Here are the 3 stages. They built a mound, they buried some people, they surrounded it in a wall, they covered it over, buried some more people, surrounded it in a wall, covered it over, buried some more people, surrounded it in a wall. And that's where you have the local and the non-local people attached to this Birdman figure. And then they decide to do something different. They stick somebody on the outer edge. It's actually right here, the northern edge of the mound. They put a person in a little house, and they cover that house with a mound. And that person has the foreign Birdman plates and the local Birdman gorget. So this is the only individual that has both. And so I interpret this to mean that this is the attempt within a little mound to combine the foreign and the local to have just one group attached to this figure. And let's see, I'm going to go back one. What happens next is they cover the whole thing over, and then they build another. They bury 5 women out here, and then they surround the entire mound with more graves and cover it all over, but I'll come back to that. So what comes after is people no longer have the copper plates with the Birdman, and they no longer have the shell gorgets with the Birdman. What they have is a headdress. And this headdress has arrow points. It's not great, but you can see it. Feathers and maces. Arrow point, feathers, mace. So they're referencing the regalia of this creator figure, but it's a completely new, and it's combining the local and non-local. So now it's just one thing. And that's when they bury 4 groups of people around the corners of the mound, and in each group there's one person that has one of these headdresses, and the copper plates are gone and the shell gorgets are gone. And so, again, manipulating the earth, they've locked into the cosmos that at Etowah, there's one group of people attached to this creator figure, and they're the ones that are at the pinnacle of Etowah. So they're recreating the world with these folks, and they've combined it all. So they're playing with the imagery to send a message to create one line. All right, so here's Mound A again. Not surprisingly, when we started doing gradiometer work, where was one of the first places you think we went? I wanted to know what was up there, right? And what we found, here's the map of it, and then I stuck it on the mound here. But what we found was buildings surrounding an open space with a big post in the middle. Does that sound familiar at all? Again, they're recreating the ceremonial space, the sacred ceremonial space, but the center of the earthly plane, and it's on top of the biggest mound in the middle of Etowah. And so they're making the earthly plane inside of an earthly plane. And at this point, you've got here in Mound C, we've set it into the cosmos that there's one ruling line of people connected to this creator figure at Etowah. And we've put the center of it right here, and we've enclosed it all in a palisade and the river. So now we've got the earthly plane writ large with these folks at the center and the center of it all right there. They've made the entire Etowah site the center of the cosmos with this figure, with these people attached to this figure who created the world. And that's where Etowah hits its peak. And as often is the case, right when everything's going great, something goes wrong. So here we are. This is why I call Etowah the Atlanta of the 14th century. This is another view of it. Here's the palisade wall going around. Here's the houses, and then there's Mound A and the open space. Not long after all that comes together, archaeologically, the wall is burned, the palisade wall is burned, houses in the village are burned, and the sacred temple on top of Mound C is sacked. How does that happen? Somebody did it, right? and probably not the people living there. So my interpretation is that the place is attacked. And this idea, especially of sacking the sacred temple, is something that we see into the period where Europeans are watching. When you really want to mess with a community, you sever their connection to the sacred. And oftentimes it leads to the community just up and leaving. It's messed up, and we're just going to have to let it be for a while and come back. And that's what happens at Etowah. As far as I can tell, there's nobody at Etowah, and there are very few people in the river valley. There probably are people there. Archaeology doesn't get to see everything. But largely, people go other places. And all of these dots are mounds in other areas. Jim Langford knows a lot about this one up here on the Coosa Wadi, but they're all over probably more in the Chattahoochee than we know, because Atlanta has eaten a lot of that. But the point is, people leave and they probably go to other places. Some people stick around in small numbers, and they're gone for about a century. People don't return until probably right before 1500, probably 3 generations. And they go to other places. And one of those other places ends up being the capital of this really big polity that Hernando de Soto visited called Coosa. And so Etowah is just a bump in Coosa at this point. It's not the big place that it was. And here are a couple of images that capture Etowah at this time. We have a new kind of pottery vessel. It's called a cazuela bowl, and it's lamar incised. The incising around the edge has been interpreted as waves or water or something like that. But here again, and I guess I'll say this one. And this is a shell gorget that is called a rattlesnake gorget. I'll show you a few other pictures because this one's a little bit, but there's a big eye, there's a body, and there's a tail, and there's an open mouth with teeth. So the people returning to Etowah, they built mounds D, E, and F that weren't there before. They reused mound B, but as far as I know, they didn't touch A or C, although the pottery Miranda is going to show me tomorrow may change my mind on some of this. But they didn't mess with the most sacred spots, but they were certainly returning to this place because they knew its history. They knew what it was. They knew how important and sacred it was, and they made it their own by recreating the earth with the mounds, and also by making these lamar-incised pots, which again we can argue are models of the cosmos. But the interesting thing is the rattlesnake gorgets. And I'm going to argue to you that these aren't rattlesnakes. Well, they aren't real snakes to begin with, right? I already said that they're modeled on things in the real world, but they're sacred beings. But there's no rattles on the tails. It's not supposed to be specifically a rattlesnake. And you look at those teeth, they're square teeth, but it's a snake, right? And I'll draw your attention to, if you look at the layout of the composition, especially, where am I? This one right here. Do you see a cross? And do you see a center? It's another version of the sacred center. But here's the interesting thing. What's the snake doing? What did I say? The spinning cross was the center of the beneath realm, right? And lo and behold, in indigenous belief, snakes are denizens of the beneath world. And if we go back to this image, then again, I already drew this, but it's a cross, but it's a spinning cross, which is like this, which is like this. And so this is a being at the center of the beneath world. Why are people, and remember, this is a living object that's connecting people to beings or powers that they then can access to do things. So why are they wearing things and connecting to a spiritual essence that is the beneath world? It's a place of chaos and death, right? But it's also the place of water, the regeneration of life, and the return of souls, which is nice. And here's where it may make a little bit more sense. Here we have, these are maps of incidents of drought. And we're going to go from 1344, which is the Atlanta of the 14th century. This is when Etowah is at its peak. And over here, it's a little bit drier than usual. When Etowah isn't really doing anything, it's pretty nice. But there's a lot of drought in the center part of the country. And what we see archaeologically is people are moving out of those areas and coming eastward through eastern Tennessee. And as we go to when Etowah gets reoccupied somewhere in here, then it's getting a little bit drier in here. And people are relocating away from the drought areas. So why are they connecting to this underworld being? Because water regeneration. If we've got droughts, then water and growth of corn particularly is going to be more of a challenge. And probably in lots of cases, there is going to be some loss of family members and ancestors. And so what are they appealing to? They're appealing to the part of the cosmos that is about water and the regeneration of life. This is also the time when Hernando de Soto visits Etowah, spent the winter at Coosa, came down to Etowah, got stuck because the river was in flood stage, stayed there for 10 days, and then continued westward. Probably within a generation of De Soto coming through, people leave Etowah. And slowly, progressively, they move down the Etowah River to the Coosa River and over into Alabama and ultimately become part of the upper creeks. And it's probably not European disease, and we don't know the impact of drought, exactly why people are doing this, but they do it. And they leave the area, and it isn't till generations later that the Cherokee move in. It becomes part of the Cherokee Nation. And so that's my story of Etowah from images. Now let's return to some of these images. Know your enemy. And if you read the text that goes with this, the artist is talking about we were removed, colonization made us leave and did all these terrible things. And it's important for us to remember who we are and who our enemy is. So this was a creator being, at the 14th century. And here it's a reminder of what was, who we are, and where we come from. And this, which is Standing Peachtree Mound, was here. That's a mound and an indigenous community that's right near Atlanta that still exists as an archaeological site that's important to Muskogee people. And the artist, you'll see the artist, they're actually representing the river and then the place of the town, but you notice they're calling upon the center of the cosmos in the sky, and it's all laid on the backdrop of the center of the earthly plane. And so what are we talking about here? Referencing our sacred past, both through the site and through the imagery, but also talking about who we are and that this place is still us and it's connected to us. So still talking about identity and place. And this is one of my favorites. As far as I remember, Miranda, there is no statement from the artist on what Skater Boy is talking about. But what I love is this is a shell gorget from the 14th century, and they're actually rolling a chunky stone, playing a game called Chunky, and they're actually in the center of the cosmos right there. They're probably emerging from the beneath world. But I love how it's been reinterpreted in terms of modern garb and things like that. But again, it's calling back to ancient imagery, ancient identity, and this is us, but this is still us, and this is how we do it now. And that's sort of the cool thing about imagery. All right, and that's my story.